5:44 on the cusp of 5:45 there. This is Greatest Hits Radio. It's confession time. If you want a confession read out, send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. There goes the drinks trolley. We get some refreshment. We read out in just a moment. What are we having today, Suze?
I have gone for a glass of Gavi.
Oh, that's a very good thing.
Yeah.
Just the one?
Well, I might have more than one later on.
One later.
Up to you.
That's a very good start to the week. Today's confession, and the first smart speaker is handed to Christopher. Good evening, Christopher. Dear Brother Simon, Brother Matthew, Sister Susie, the rest of the congregation. My confession goes way back to the early 90s. I'd like to keep my own name a secret. Let's say it's Christopher. The reason being is that I still work for the same company, a bank. I've now had 36 years working for the bank. I would like to stay working for a few years more. So back to the early 90s, I joined said High Street Bank in 1988 and had worked all the basic jobs that they give to the new entrants for a couple of years. I then started to progress a little through the ranks. Now, this bank had acquired about 20 years previously a lovely stately home in the countryside, which it used as a base to train all its upcoming stars of the future. Staff would normally go there for a week, stay in plush bedrooms and learn about our next roles or some technical banking skills, that kind of thing. A good 300 or so bank staff would attend each week. I was chosen to go on a management course. This place had a 9-hole golf course, snooker rooms, pool tables, 50p pints.
Wow.
Even in the early 90s, 50p for a pint was a superb concession. Wow. More importantly, there was an outbuilding that housed an indoor swimming pool and some squash courts. On my course that week, there was probably a 50-50 split between young 20-something males and females. And as often can happen, the lads formed a close bond together and the ladies likewise. And for 2 days solid, us lads were taunted for not being as clever. To be honest, they were correct, by the women who said their intellect was far superior to ours. And every time we got a question wrong in a class, they would laugh out loud or roll their eyes at us. Well, we got to the Wednesday that week, and after our course had ended for the day at around 5 p.m, about 4 or 5 of us lads decided to go over to the squash courts and have a few games. On our walk back from the building to the main house, it was about 300 yards, we met some of the girls from our course, and they told us they were going for a swim, and they might see us later at the staff bar. Well, we let them go on their way, and we carried on walking back to the main house, and at that point, one of the lads with us said, "Here, wait here, I've just got to get something." He ran in, he did sound like that.
Yes.
He ran in and he came back to us with a gorilla mask. To this day, I still do not know why he brought a gorilla mask to the course, but it was a full-on gorilla mask. "Let's have a laugh and get them girls back," he said. It was late autumn of that year, and the sun had just set, and the grounds were getting swathed in that autumnal, twilighty darkness. We crept up to the pool complex, and the lad put on his gorilla mask. The pool had a fogged privacy glass up to about head height. We could hear the girls chatting in the pool, but we couldn't see over the privacy glass. The lad with the gorilla mask got on my shoulders, and I raised him up so just his head could be seen by the girls. The rest of us banged on the glass and made the best gorilla noises ever, and then probably ran off back to the main house laughing and giggling. Well, half an hour or so later, we were at the evening meal, but none of the girls from the pool had turned up. A few of the others on our course said that they thought maybe they'd gone down to the pub in the village, so we just presumed that that's where they'd all gone. After the meal, we went to the staff common room to see how many 50p pints we could have. Before the bar staff and the bank tutors closed it all up at 11, they sent us off to our rooms. Well, we were having a decent night playing snooker and having a laugh, but at around 9:30, the chat and laughter in the staff common room was brought to an abrupt halt when about 6 or 7 policemen walked in, some with guns.
What?
Started talking to all the staff in the room, accompanied by a group of rather worried-looking tutors. When they eventually got around to talking to us, they asked if we'd seen an escaped gorilla from Chipperfield Circus around the grounds. It was at this point the tutors told us that Chipperfield Circus paid rent to the bank to house their animals and equipment over the winter on the grounds, about a mile to the north of the stately home that was our staff college. Apparently the girls had seen a gorilla when they were in the pool and had been too scared to get out of the pool. They had stayed in there for 2 hours until one of them was brave enough to run out of the pool, run down the corridor, past the squash courts and pick up the phone get put through to reception. Remember, there are no mobile phones. They told reception the gorilla was lurking around the pool house and they daren't leave. Reception then called the police. The police put 2 and 2 together and came up with 5. They'd presumed that the gorilla had escaped from the circus.
Oh, come on.
We all looked at each other, concealing a mixture of guilt, laughter, and overwhelmingly thought we got the girls back good and proper. And of course said that we hadn't seen a thing. Well, suffice it to say, the drinking and snooker playing ended abruptly that night, and we were all sent to our rooms for our own safety and told to keep our doors shut. We woke the next morning to hear that the traumatised girls had gone home early, and because of that our course was cancelled, and we're told that we'd have to go home too. Not only that, but because of the gorilla, there were still police marksmen on the ground because he hadn't been found. The whole college had to be shut down for a week.
Wow.
And some 300 trainee managers, cashiers, account openers, lending officers all had to be sent home early as well. To this day, we had sworn to keep the gorilla mask incident to ourselves for fear of our careers being affected. But about 30 years of built-up guilt has got me to this place, and I seek forgiveness from the girls we all took part in scaring and scaring the living daylights out of. Forgiveness from the staff and tutors, who I am presuming were on edge for quite a few weeks afterwards, and obviously from the police for wasting their time. But more importantly, from the 300-odd bank trainees who had their course abruptly cancelled, and that could well have affected their career. Well, let's check in with the verdict on that one. A shocking gorilla confession. Christopher needs the forgiveness from Sister Susie, first of all.
Well, Christopher, I really feel for him here, because I feel like, how did you know all this was going to happen? You just didn't know that, did you? It's just not like... Oh. And also, well, did they not check that the gorilla was still at the circus? I feel like they could have done that as well. And
called the circus, yes.
I just feel like I kind of am on your side a little bit here, but then I feel like I don't like pranks, and it was a bit silly. And just because the girls were better than you at the quizzes and the questions, then I just feel like you didn't need to do it. So for that reason, I'm not going to forgive.
Brother Matthew?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to forgive. I mean, yes, obviously, a bit of a prank and all of that got out a little out of hand. But, as you say, was no one calling up the circus and saying, how many gorillas have you got? Have you still got the same number of gorillas? In that case, we don't need the marksman. Also, these girls that were so good at the quiz couldn't tell that wasn't a real gorilla. I mean, a little bit thick. But as we go into the music, yes. I think that means I choose to forgive.
Thank you very much indeed. People's verdict, please, 61054. But just before the news, we had our first confession of the week from Christopher, a tale of male bankers who scared the female bankers on a course while they were swimming with a gorilla mask. They thought it was a real gorilla and called the police, and then the police arrived with those police with guns. And that was the end of the training course, and everyone took it very seriously. But the people's verdict is in. Here it comes.
No forgiveness from me, says Jennifer in Cardiff. Pranks are so immature and childish. You also ruin the course for everyone, which is just ridiculous. But Graham says total forgiveness. I, too, took a gorilla mask to an office Christmas party to impress the girls. Didn't work out as I'd hoped, but that's a different story, stroke confession.
Is that ever a good idea?
Never, not really.
So.
And Josh says, forgiven. Spent many a wasted week at that place in the 80s and 90s. Would have been even better if it had happened while I was on the course, so it could have been cancelled. Worse, my girlfriend at the time was a tutor there. Pity she wasn't one of the girls in the pool.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for the verdicts. And if you have a confession, please send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Okay, Greatest Hits Radio. Now, I don't want to overplay the kind of 12 certificates of this confession, particularly. I'm just saying some people are sensitive to that kind of thing.
Okay.
But I think it's essentially fine.
It's fine.
It's essentially fine. But let's have a stiff drink first of all, anyway. What are we grabbing from the drinks trolley today, Suze?
Well, this actually might not be a great idea with a confession, but I've gone for, because the nights are getting a bit darker, I've gone for a hot chocolate with a big marshmallow in the top.
Okay, that's
lovely.
That's a very, very bad idea.
Which is a very, very bad idea.
Very bad idea. But hey, as you're about to find out. Okay, today's confession comes from Steve, a daily listener of the show in Piracicaba in Brazil.
Oh.
So,
wow.
Thank you for listening from Brazil. If we have any other listeners in Brazil, please get in touch. Father Simon and the Confessional Collective. This takes place in 1986, back when I was 15 and a mere fourth year 10 in modern money, in my hometown. My mother, through her work contacts, had arranged for me and as many of my school friends to go and watch the live wrestling every Wednesday at the White Rock Theatre on the seafront. Names such as Kendo Nagasaki, Klondike Kate, and even the occasional superstars of the day such as Big Daddy or Giant Haystacks were great fan favourites, especially to me and the 5 to 8 friends, a bit vague, who would 5 or 8, what is it? 6, would crash in almost ringside for free each week. As we all lived in various parts of this town, we would all meet up at our friend Jonathan's house, as he lived closest to the theatre, so we could walk together. And it's here where I start my confession, an absolute tussle of light and dark forces for which I seek absolution. You see, I was then, as I am today, a big fan of the unholy trinity of Whitesnake, Deep Purple, and Iron Maiden.
Oh, yes.
On this particular night, I was proudly wearing my new purchase of an official Iron Maiden Number of the Beast t-shirt. It was black, of course, with Eddie manipulating the devil like a malevolent puppet master. You've probably got one of those, haven't you?
Absolutely.
That night, as I walked to Jonathan's house, I left on my own and my mind was blank, and so was my stomach. And so I went to the local shop and got a king-size Mars bar. And I ate it like any teenager would, inhaling the chocolatey nougat and toffee goodness, barely chewing it at all. Happy was I as I knocked on Jonathan's door, a belly full of candy and a new t-shirt and the promise of a good night's wrestling ahead. Little did I know that I would have to go through a little wrestling of the spiritual kind before leaving Jonathan's house. You see, unbeknownst to me, Jonathan's family were extremely religious and very active members of the local church. On opening the door and taking one look at my Iron Maiden t-shirt, Jonathan quickly pulled me through into the kitchen where some of our friends had already gathered, and he shut the door. "What are you wearing?" he said with panic in his voice. "It's my new t-shirt. It's good, isn't it?" "Good? You can't wear it in this house. If my mum sees it, she'll blow a fit. Iron Maiden are the devil's band and you'll be seen as the agent of Satan. Stay in the kitchen and don't go out until everyone arrives, okay?" Jonathan did that most English of things to calm everyone down, and he put the kettle on to have a cup of tea. So there we were, sipping on our hot tea, when suddenly the kitchen door bursts open and in walks Jonathan's mum. Immediately her eyes caught sight of my t-shirt and her whole face took on the expression of Carrie's mother seeing her in the prom dress. Her face was turning through shades of red and purple as waves of righteous anger writhed through her very soul. Through tightened lips she seethed, "Jonathan, I really must speak with you." And so it began. You see, this is the problem. I got the giggles. The only thing was, I also had a mouthful of tea, which I was in the process of swallowing, and it was now stuck in my throat. Jonathan's mum saw me, and in her eyes, all she saw was a teenager in a devil t-shirt starting to convulse. With more urgency, she said, "Jonathan, I really must talk with you now." And this set my giggling and convulsions even stronger. Only now, the unswallowed tea in my throat had started to trigger my gag reflex. I think I'm going to be sick, I thought. The thought of throwing up in front of his mum and adding to my giggle and convulsions, which were now causing my whole body to move and jerk around uncontrollably. Clearly proof that I was possessed. Jonathan, in the meantime, was caught between looking at me convulse and his mum turning purple with rage and was doing one of those comic indecisive moves back and forth. "Jonathan, I must talk with you now outside."
What a voice.
Says his mum. That was too much for me, and the tea in my throat had done its thing, and there was nothing for it now but for me to perform like Linda Blair style in the Exorcist movie, which obviously I hadn't seen at the time. Imagine the scene. Imagine the look of utter disbelief on Jonathan's face. Imagine the sheer terror and rage on the face of his poor mother. Imagine the look of delight on the faces of our friends and the extreme sheer pandemonium that they were witnessing. Yes, we cleaned up the mess, and fortunately my t-shirt and the rest of me was left unscathed from the events that had transpired. I've taken quite a lot out at this point.
I bet you have. Yeah.
And after a quiet admonishing from his mother and a stern banishment from our house, never ever come back again, we did eventually leave and enjoy a great evening of wrestling. So, Father Simon, Sister Susie, brothers Nigel and Matt and Holly, it is time for me to ask forgiveness, not from Jonathan, for he was the provider of the tea, not from our friends, for it provided a story of such legend it was told and retold throughout the rest of the fourth form, not even from Jonathan's poor mum, who did, as a good Christian woman, fully forgive my folly. No, Father Simon, I ask forgiveness from Iron Maiden, Bruce, Steve, Adrian, Dave and Clive, who was replaced by Nico. For, as I said, it was the mid-80s and the height of heavy metal satanic panic in the USA courts and rock media, with legendary heroes such as the Maiden being blamed for corrupting the youth of today and the devils and evils of the world. I ask for their forgiveness, as I am certain that my little demonstration did nothing to calm the situation or alleviate the concern. That is why I now live in Brazil, and I'm going to...
What? That's the reason I live in Brazil?
Yes, he's had to leave the country, and I'm going to see Iron Maiden in Sao Paulo in December as a pilgrimage of repentance. Thank you, Father Simon. So you see, the vomit was caused by a convulsion, and it was not possession of the devil.
No,
it was tea plus Mars bar. Sister Susie, what do you say?
Well, I don't know. I just don't like sick, really, Steve, if I'm being completely honest. Like, you shouldn't scoff a chocolate bar that fast, that there's the possibility that it might come back up. That's never a good place to be in. I also think that you should have probably considered, you must have known Jonathan's family were quite strict and religious, and maybe going in there with an Iron Maiden t-shirt wasn't the best in the first place. And I think you were just trying to stir the pot and cause trouble. And for that reason, I will not forgive.
Brother Matthew from the Rock
I would
Pit.
agree. He probably was trying to stir the pot there, wasn't he? But Jonathan's mum, it's only a band, Jonathan's mum, come on, do calm down. So I'm going to forgive because, it's Iron Maiden and I'm going to see them on that same tour next year. So I'm looking forward to that already. And it was all going fine, wasn't it? And given there were all that tea around, it was clearly a case of bring your saucer to the slaughter. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
It's one of the worst.
Bring your saucer to the slaughter.
Okay, well, Matt's not forgiven for that, but is Steve in Brazil forgiven for his Iron Maiden confession? 61054 on the text. In just a moment, however, before the news, a confession involving young Steve, who was just a fourth year back in the day, and he was wearing very proudly his new Iron Maiden t-shirt featuring the devil, but his friend's very religious mum took exception to it. He then got the giggles and choked on his tea and Mars bar, and the general evidence seemed to suggest that Steve was possessed. And actually, he was just having tea and Mars bar.
Correct, yeah.
So the people's verdict is in. Here it comes.
So forgiven, says Mitch in Mitcham. So funny. The mum needs to lighten up. He didn't mean to throw up the tea everywhere. Samantha in Edinburgh. Forgiven. I love this confession. My mum wasn't best pleased that I like wearing Iron Maiden t-shirts either. Thankfully, didn't have a disastrous situation of being sick on the kitchen floor, though. And Mike offers absolute absolution and forgiveness. As a Christian and a rock fan, I remember well slipping some Deep Purple riffs into the latest charismatic bop. No problem, because after all, God gave rock and roll to you.
There's a song in there somewhere. That's very good. I should have that as a big 45.
Definitely.
Play some Argent. Okay. Very good. Thank you for all the verdicts. And if you have a confession, send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. If you use it, you get a smart speaker. The new podcast with you on Friday. In time, there's the drinks trolley rumbling past. What are we grabbing from it today just to ease us on our way?
I have grabbed a nice glass of white wine, and I've gone for a Chardonnay Gruner Veltliner blend.
Yes.
Which was from Australia. Well, actually from Oldie, but, Australia.
Oh, yeah. Yes,
via Australia. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. 3 of those, and we'll be fine. I mean, 1 each, obviously. Today's confession comes from Thomas. Can I just say right at the very beginning, please do not try any of this at home. It's one of those. Do not try any of this at home, because this is from back in the day.
Right.
Thank you for your wonderful show, says Thomas. I've heard many confessions, and they always make me think of a sorry incident which dates back to my teenage school days, well over 40 years ago now. I'm afraid to say it's a sad account of thievery and trickery, and I'm quite ashamed of, and have kept close to my chest for the whole period of this time. During my school days, I did enjoy playing a few tricks and japes on my friends and family and teachers. One particular stemmed from a particularly interesting chemistry lesson by our teacher, who was teaching us the properties of magnesium. He was a good teacher, always made chemistry lessons fascinating. In this lesson, he showed us what happened when you set fire to magnesium, the brilliant white light it emitted, and how to capture the gases that had been released during this violent reaction. It was excellent, and it was a fun lesson. Once he'd finished his demonstration, he told us to queue up at the front of the class so he could replicate the experiment. He instructed us to cut 10 centimeters of magnesium ribbon from the big reel that he had and then take it back to our workbenches. When it was my turn to cut off a piece of the reel, Mr. Ricks was distracted, so I cut off a meter by mistake and slipped it into my pocket before cutting off another 10 centimetres for the experiment. Well, when school finished for the day, I rushed home with a metre of pure metal excitement hidden in my bag.
Dear.
That evening, as I sat with my parents watching one of the 3 TV channels that were available back then, I pondered what I could do with the remaining magnesium. Nothing was really coming to mind. At this point, I should mention that my dad was an actor and often away from home. When he did come back, he would always stamp his authority. He wasn't a bad father, but would always expect my brother and me to wait on him and my mother to prepare his food. Then he would sit there in his armchair and chain smoke for the rest of the evening. If he wanted the channel changed, it would fall to me or my brother to get up and change the channel. No remote controls back then. His house, his rules. As you can imagine, it was really annoying, and my brother and me were always planning ways to get our own back, but we never took any action. He was an ex-boxer, and you didn't want to mess with him. As I sat there, passive smoking with about half a metre of magnesium in my pocket, I thought of a way of taking revenge. Now, smoking was a cheap habit back then, so my dad would always have a few spare packs of cigarettes lying around. One was always left in the front room on his armchair. The next day, while he was out, I cut several centimetres of magnesium, took a cigarette out of that pack and carefully pushed it deep into the tobacco before hiding the cigarette back in the packet. That evening, when my dad came home, he once again turned on the TV and turned the channel over despite our protest, then sat down and started smoking. I sat there transfixed, watching him, waiting for the sudden blaze of magnesium igniting. The first cigarette was smoked without incident, as was the second. I was convinced it would be the third, but still nothing happened. When he lit the fourth cigarette and nothing happened, I was convinced, he's going through a lot of fags, that it wasn't going to happen that evening. Then, as he took a drag on the fifth cigarette, it suddenly exploded with a bright magnesium flare. My dad jumped up in surprise, choking and knocking over his cup of tea and trying to put the cigarette out in the nearest ashtray. In a totally believable exclamation, having an actor as a father has its benefits, I said, "What the hell was that, Dad?" "I don't know," he mumbled as he tried to put out the fire that had started in his nostril hairs. He rushed off to the bathroom and I could hear him splashing water on his face. When he returned, he examined the remains of the cigarette. All traces of the magnesium had disappeared, so he couldn't work out what had happened. He angrily questioned whether I had anything to do with it, and I denied all knowledge. Some of my best acting ever. He then went and questioned my brother, who didn't have a clue as I hadn't told him. For the rest of the evening, my dad didn't smoke a single cigarette and kept moaning that all he could smell was his singed nose hair. He kept looking at the packet with suspicion and eventually became convinced that the packet was faulty. There was only one thing my dad could do. He always enjoyed writing long letters of complaint and venting any anger that he had. For days he composed a venomous letter of complaint to the tobacco company and sent them a letter with 5 pages in it, enclosing the faulty fags. While we waited for the response, I noticed that he was no longer chain smoking and was examining every cigarette very carefully before having a smoke. We heard nothing for several weeks, and then a parcel arrived from the tobacco company. The letter basically said they were very sorry, have 1,000 fags as way of an apology. But to be honest, it's a different era.
Have 1,000 fags.
My dad wasn't impressed. He didn't want them because he changed brands by then. So he took them to his golf club and sold them to a friend. His suspicion of each cigarette continued over the next few months, and then one day he suddenly announced that he was given up smoking as it was becoming too expensive. No mention of his encounter with the nose-burning magnesium was mentioned, and he was true to his word. He packed up that very day and he never smoked again. Now I think I should really apologise to my teacher for stealing the magnesium, my brother for the grilling that he received. Unfortunately, my dad passed away quite a while ago, so I can't apologise to him. I'm sure if he was still around and I confessed to him, he would have taken it as a jolly good laugh. I hope that your listeners will be equally as forgiving and agree that smoking is certainly dangerous to your health and your nose hairs. And maybe, I think this should be taken into consideration. Thomas actually gave his father a better life because he made him stop smoking. A brief moment, a brief flare-up, and then his life was better because of what Thomas did. Sister Susie, I think, might not agree.
Well, I do see what you mean there, Thomas. You did stop your dad smoking, and I do think that is a good thing. However, this is just you shouldn't. By accident, you took a meter of magnesium. No, you didn't. You did it on purpose, and that is danger. Danger, high voltage. Exactly. And for that reason, I don't think I can forgive.
No, that's the responsible thing. And obviously, don't do any of that at home. Don't play with magnesium.
Obviously
exactly.
Because it's a very dangerous thing.
Danger.
Lots of people with chemistry sets will have done fairly similar things.
Yeah, I think so.
Brother Matthew.
I'm going to forgive. That's one of the best confessions we've done for a long time. I didn't think we could get better after the singed nostril hairs. But then the fag company say, "Here, have 1,000 fags." No thanks, I've changed brands and I'm off to the golf club to make some money. Brilliant. Oh my goodness, I love that. So yes, definitely forgiven. Well done.
Okay, it's the People's Verdict. Do you forgive Thomas, please? Yes or no on the People's Verdict. 61054 on the text for the People's Verdict. 61054. Make the first word Simon. Just before the news, we had a confession from Thomas about magnesium ribbon from a chemistry lesson inserted into his father's cigarette, which then burst into flames. And despite 1,000 fags being sent by the cigarette company, father gave up his chain smoking pretty much straight away. So it all had a happy ending. People's Verdict, here we go.
Not forgiven, says Michelle in Cardiff. As annoying as the dad sounded, playing a prank like that on him sounds so mean. The poor chap was just sitting in his armchair when his nostril hairs went up in flames. Fiona, the science teacher, also says not forgiven. What an idiot. Also, what science teacher gives out 10 centimetres of magnesium ribbon to pupils? More like 1 or 2 centimetres at the most. Everything about that was horrific.
Excellent. Thank you, Fiona.
And Ricky in Aberdeen says forgiven. As Matt says, I love the fact that they sent him 1,000 fags, but he changed brands. Sounds like a fun little trick, which all ended well.
It was very 70s sitcom, the whole thing.
It definitely was, yeah.
If you have a confession, please send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Right now it's confession time, and just a helpful reminder, I think, from us, that the new podcast arrives tomorrow.
Oh, it does,
So
doesn't it?
subscribe, and it'll just appear majestically in your inbox. Hope you can enjoy that. There's the drinks trolley. What have we grabbed, Suze, from there?
Well, because it's Halloween, I've gone for a Bloody Mary.
Oh.
See what I've done there. I like to add a shot of port in mine just to make it, slightly different and a bit more tastier. But vodka, gin, tomato juice, Tabasco, celery salt, black pepper, lovely stuff there.
Could I have a bit of lemon, please? Still haven't had one.
And that.
Today's confession comes from Martin. Thank you, Martin, for this. Dear Simon and the teams, it's so good to have you back on the drive time slot again, especially on a Friday. Oh. When my wife, Debbie, and I have that song happily nailed with our own song and dance routine.
Oh, good.
Ooh.
An interesting, if irrelevant fact at the beginning of this confession. Martin says, my confession relates... you're going to have to help us out on this one, Suze, because it's a bit of a pub-based confession.
Okay.
My confession relates to a time when I was the licensee of a pub in the Isle of Man. It's late 1980. We had a great bunch of regulars and a fine pool team who used to practice keenly all week, lubricated by copious amounts of beer, which seemed to improve the accuracy of their shots. How does that happen?
Never.
We had an elderly local called Yorkie, who had appointed himself as an unofficial glass collector and ashtray emptier, different times.
Yeah.
And he used to shuffle around the tables, clearing glasses, bottles, and other pub-related detritus, which was fair enough. But Yorkie also had a habit of mine-sweeping pints that were still on the go. Now, mine-sweeping, what's that?
Yeah. So generally, if someone leaves a glass unattended, most of the time it's because they've left and they either didn't want the drink or they rushed off or they'd had a bit too much, and then someone would come along and snaffle it for themselves and finish it off, which is quite grim, really.
Okay, so it's drinking someone else's drink. Okay.
Yeah,
So
drinking
Yorkie had a
someone
habit
else's
of
leftovers.
minesweeping pints that were there, that were still on the go. That's the crucial thing.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
hadn't left them. Craftily smuggling them through to the quieter snug, where he could swig his ill-gotten gains while puffing away on his pipe. Again, different times. Lager, stout, mild, heavy, Foster's, Castlemaine, Tennant's, you name it, he swept it.
All of them. Wow.
Anyway, this practice was starting to grate with some of the pool team lads, and they plotted their revenge on Yorkie, who was also known as the Ghoul from Ghoul. The Ghoul from Ghoul.
Oh, right.
It works better on the page.
Yeah, it probably does.
At that time, there was a newly launched Irish stout, Murphy's, from Cork.
Oh, yeah.
It was doing the rounds, and it was proving very popular with the regulars. So it was arranged that on the next home pool match, a nearly full pint of the jet black, creamy blue brew even was strategically placed on the table nearest to the snug as bait. And sure enough, having clocked it, Yorkie circled a couple of times like a hungry shark, and eventually snaffled the pint out of sight in a swift movement, with everyone that was in on the plot looking knowingly at each other, waiting patiently for the imminent reaction. We had to wait because he also had some Carling Black Label that he'd stolen, also some Tuborg
Tuborg, wow.
to knock back. Remember that?
Yeah.
Sure enough, after a couple of minutes, a blood-curdling scream went up, and we heard the screech. This is a customary Isle of Man phrase. "Oh, you wretched blighters."
Yeah.
We've changed that slightly. You see, whilst he was draining the remains of the delicious stout, something had floated towards his open gob.
Oh.
And that thing was the severed head of a herring.
What?
Eyes open,
Wow.
Oh, no.
mouth gaping,
Oh, it would have been so fishy.
innards trailing slightly, which had been lurking unseen in the depths of the black brew. It slid down the glass towards his mouth, stopping just short of his lips. Maybe they just
Blech.
touched. Yorkie, who is sadly no longer with us, was clearly shaken by the episode, but a lot more careful about which drinks he cleared away after what became known as Fishgate. But I still feel pangs of guilt to this day for not intervening and allowing the cruel act to take place, and seek forgiveness, Simon, from your kind and understanding colleagues. Thanks again for putting the team back together and making so many people happy. Well, it's an absolute pleasure.
Good. Yeah.
Thanks very much indeed, Martin. A tale of minesweeping and the severed head of a herring. Sister Susie.
Well, do you know what? I don't like Yorkie at all. I think it's disgusting that he'd go round and steal people's drinks. You know, beer, even in those days, cost people's hard-earned cash spending on them, and you don't want, if you haven't finished with it, no one can steal it.
He's dead, though.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, definitely.
No, he is dead.
He is dead.
Yeah.
He is. And it must have tasted fishy as well when he was
Yes,
drinking
you'd have
that.
thought so, wouldn't you?
Martin, do you know what? You're another publican, and for that reason alone, I'm going to forgive you.
Okay. Brother Matthew.
I mean, dead or not, Yorkie had it coming, didn't he? The ghoul, it was all coming his way. I shouldn't have been doing your minesweeping. And this is the kind of, it would only work, wouldn't it? The fish head in the pint with stout. It would only work with a
Lager would be no good.
absolutely. Could have got that in your Castlemaine. So yes, I'm going to forgive. Yes, quite right. Shouldn't have been doing it, should you, Yorkie?
Wouldn't have worked
No.
in a glass of Pinot Grigio, would it?
Pinot and none of your carver. No.
No, I don't think so. Anyway, just mentioning drinks
Other
for no
drinks
reason.
now. Do send them
Okay,
in.
right. Forgiveness or otherwise for Martin, please, for his fishy prank in the dark ale. Let us know, 61054. Thank you very much. We had a confession from Martin, the Isle of Man, story of pub life in the 1980s, and Yorkie, who had a habit of minesweeping, and then they stopped it by using the severed head of a herring floating in a glass of stout. People's verdict, here it comes.
So Tom in Macclesfield says, forgiven, I love this confession. Yorkie got his just desserts, if you ask me. Sneakily taking people's drinks and then drinking them in the corner is both antisocial and weird. Well done, Martin. Ricky in Glasgow says, not forgiven, only because this confession is so gross. Just the thought of the fishy alcoholic beverage is enough to make me feel ill. But Lucy says, forgiven. I'm with Matt and Susie on this one. The fishy taste must have put him off stealing people's drinks for life.
If If you have a confession, please send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. The new podcast will be with you tomorrow.